The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass Five College Credit Union, dedicated to creating access to financial well-being for local people, businesses, and communities. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, music and more with Jazz at Tanglewood Learning Institute and a chat with saxophonist Nick Hempton, who performs there tomorrow night.
Plus, we get to sit with the guest conductor for the Springfield Symphony Orchestra's upcoming concert, Kedrick Armstrong.
But first, it's been a literal doozy of a week, what with threats of actual genocide coming straight from the person ostensibly in charge of this nation.
Which is the very big tip of a very, very large political iceberg. So let's see how deep we can go with some of the issues coming to the fore with Congressman Jim McGovern.
Thanks for coming to do your press conference at the Shea in Avenue A the other day.
We wanted to announce some of the money that we were able to get, and it worked out good. We did you and then we get the money for Avenue A before, so it was nice to see people. There's some good people in the community there, and Montague really is moving forward. I mean, a lot of good stuff has been happening there over the last few years. So
we try hard. I love the fact that you have a portable podium with the seal of the U.S. Congress on it. I got to talk to Kobe from your office all about, where is the podium now? Whose office has the podium? It's the little things that fascinate me.
It's in the trunk of the car.
Yeah, right. Time once again for our weekly conversation with U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, Congressman Jim McGovern, in a segment that I like to call McGoverning with McGovern. You used your congressional privilege in a very interesting way yesterday to inspect an ICE facility, and I want to talk about that for sure, but I think we should start with our narrowly missed Armageddon. Tuesday, in a Truth Social threat to Iran, the president tweeted on his own social media site, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want this to happen, but it probably will." This after his heartwarming Easter Sunday missive. Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one. In Iran, there will be nothing like it. Open the effing straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. There are about 1,000 things that I find troubling with those two sentences. Congress is currently still on recess, but what have you been hearing, either from your colleagues or from your constituents, about what has gone on with this potential destruction of a civilization in Iran?
Look, this guy is speaking not like a president of the United States, but like a madman. This is not normal, and I'm really frustrated with some of my Republican colleagues and even some commentators on TV who just try to normalize this by saying, oh, that's just Trump. No, these are the ravings of somebody who is, not all there. Very disturbing, sending all the wrong signals to the world. I mean, basically what he's saying is that, we're prepared to commit genocide. Again, we're the United States of America. We're supposed to be the leader in the world in terms of human rights. And yet this is Donald Trump talking about wiping out an entire civilization. I'm glad that there's a ceasefire. I hope it lasts. But this is a very, very troubling moment for our country.
Well, the ceasefire is tentative at best. According to the AP today, Israel has been bombing Beirut, sort of in lieu of bombing Tehran, and Tehran continues to hold on to the Strait of Hormuz. Is this ceasefire going to hold? If it doesn't hold, are these Republicans that have been threatening to break ranks going to join the Democrats in another attempt to pass a war powers resolution?
Well, I hope that they join with us and pass a war powers resolution, but Trump is an intimidating factor for Republicans. So Republicans will tell you quietly that they're opposed to this and they're disturbed by these things. But when push comes to shove and they have to do things publicly, like vote or advocate for something, they're nowhere to be found. And if there ever was a moment for people to stand up for human rights and to stand up for what is right, it is now.
I know that you're not a lawyer, but a local community member from Greenfield, Isaac Mass, is a lawyer. He also owns the Garden Cinema. He's a lifelong Republican who has broken ranks in many ways with Donald Trump. A friend, I'll also say. He posted, in Massachusetts, a threat to commit a crime is a crime. Is a threat to commit a war crime a war crime? Is anybody thinking in these ways about what Trump has at least been posturing about? That, you can't threaten to commit a crime in Massachusetts without there being repercussions.
Well, who's going to hold Trump accountable? Mm-hmm. I mean, we have a Republican-controlled Congress that, won't even do oversight hearings. And I do think he's behaving in a criminal way. I do think it's dangerous not just for the United States, but for the world. The temporary deal is, quite frankly, worse than the status quo was. We had a ceasefire. There was no violence. Then Trump decides to create violence, and now we're trying to find a way to get out of it. Yeah, I do think that we are violating international law. I do think we are behaving in a way that, quite frankly, goes against our values and our history. But again, we have a Congress that goes along to get along, and there are no checks and balances right now.
The other thing that we saw come up this week in response to Trump's tweets, both about the destruction of the civilization and the harsh rhetoric on Easter Sunday, was the 25th Amendment, Section 4, where it says the vice president and a majority of the cabinet can declare the president disabled, immediately making the vice president the acting president. It's very complicated after that fact, because then Trump could just say, no, I'm not disabled, and the Congress would have to vote. Is this something that is a serious avenue that you're hearing about, other than just the chatter in the social media sphere?
Understand one thing. As we speak, we're in our second week of recess. Congress is not even in session, which is amazing and stunning given all that's happening in the world and all that's happening in this country. And I think rank and file Republicans are afraid of him. I mean, I've said to my friends who are Republicans, please stop coming up and telling me that he's a madman or that he's out of control or that he's a terrible president, and then go on the House floor and say he's the greatest president in history. And I'm not impressed with, what you feel privately if you're not going to express that publicly. And I think that's one of the problems right now, is that the Republican-led Congress is afraid of him. But this is a moment for courage. And I really do believe, if you're a Republican and you believe this stuff is wrong, you have a moral obligation to speak out. But to go along to get along because you think it might help you get reelected, come on, give me a break. The world is exploding because of this guy in the White House, and we need members of Congress to reel him in, to do our job.
You did call, along with other Democrats and some Republicans, to reconvene Congress amidst this recess, but that fell on deaf ears. Congress will be back in session next week, Monday?
We're supposed to come back Monday, but getting to any serious work won't be till Tuesday. And again, the Speaker hasn't told us what we're going to be doing next week. Chances are we're going to be doing a bunch of nonsense stuff that doesn't make any difference. We should be debating this war, but I'm willing to bet you that we're not. It'll be a lot of fluff, nothing serious, and nothing addressing the current crises.
Historically, when the president has used war powers without Congress's authorization, if a war goes on or an action goes on longer than 60 days, Congress does get involved. So I guess there maybe is some potential, from what I'm reading, from Republicans saying that would be 60 days might be the deadline. So we'll see, I guess, as that looms closer. Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, McGoverning with McGovern, yesterday, you conducted an unannounced oversight visit of an ICE facility in Burlington, Massachusetts. Members of Congress have the right to inspect these facilities without warning. What did you observe there in Burlington, Massachusetts, not too far from Western Mass here?
Yeah, well, these facilities are like jails. Let's be clear about that. And my concern is that the people that are being picked up and put in these jails don't deserve to be there. Yeah, if people are committing crimes and committing acts of violence, absolutely, I understand that, right? We all do. But, I met a guy yesterday from Honduras who's got a family, was separated from his family. He's got a wife and two kids, was working, had applied for political asylum. He's a member of an indigenous community in Honduras. Life has been threatened. He's afraid to go back. And he's been picked up and he's been thrown into jail, separated from his family. He doesn't have any money and, is desperately trying to figure out a way to get his status settled and to be reunited with his family. Meanwhile, he's out of work and his family is struggling to pay the rent. I think most people in this country believe that that's not what we should be doing. Right? People like that, should be allowed to pursue their political asylum claims without having the fear of being put in jail. Increasingly, we're seeing people being put in detention who, quite frankly, do not deserve to be there. People who are following all the rules and they're still being put in detention. And I find that outrageous. It's a human rights tragedy. It's a waste of taxpayer money. And again, I'm somebody who has long called for the abolition of ICE. I did so back in 2018 when they were separating kids from their families. I thought that was inhumane. I still believe that. We ought to scrap it and start all over again.
Did you see anything that troubled you conditions-wise there? Did you see children in this detention facility? Anything that stuck out to you as you were inspecting this ICE facility in Burlington?
When I get there were very few people actually in the facility. But what stuck out to me is that for all the talk about how this is this is not a jail, this is a different kind of a facility. It's a jail. We've all been in jails. We know what jails look like. This is a jail. There are questions about whether or not there's adequate healthcare support for people with healthcare issues. In the Burlington site, people only there for 24 to 48 to 72 hours. I mean, they try to move people through quickly. And there were only a handful of people there when I was there. But I just happened to ask if I could talk to this one guy who, again, I was expecting to hear about an extensive criminal record. And what I heard is about a guy who's married, has 2 kids, trying to raise his family, working, afraid to go back to his home country. He's been threatened. And, now finds himself in jail, separated from his family, who don't even live anywhere near Burlington. He's probably going to be sent off to Rhode Island or someplace else. This is just not, I think, who we are as a country. And by the way, this administration is cutting, SNAP benefits, cutting benefits for health care, cutting benefits for rebuilding our roads and bridges. This is what they're spending money on? Like, come on. I mean, we're better than this. And I'm hoping that the midterm elections will kind of be a wake-up call to this administration that this kind of stuff can't continue.
Well, speaking of cuts to SNAP, there was a new study that just came out this week that's talking about how hunger is certainly on the rise post-COVID. A 2024 study had 37% of Massachusetts households relying on emergency food. This new study says 40% of households, a 3% increase. Hampden County experiencing the highest rate at 53%, followed by Franklin and Hampshire counties with a combined total of 48%. Berkshire County at 38%. Of course, this goes along racial lines as well. Hispanic households experiencing food insecurity at a rate of 80%, the highest ever recorded. You were at the Greater Boston Food Bank's annual statewide food access study. Tell us what you learned from that study and what you learned from that meeting at the Greater Boston Food Bank.
So it's the Greater Boston Food Bank working with the Mass General Brigham put this study together. Mm-hmm. Look, at 40% of families in Massachusetts are food insecure or hungry. 40%. It's almost half. I mean, we're the United States of America, right? We're the richest country in the history of the world. And in this state, and we're better than most other states in the nation, 40% be classified as food insecure. And we're going in the wrong direction. And when, people don't have access to good nutrition, kids can't learn in school. Even though we have universal school meals, showing up to school on Monday hungry takes you a while to be able to get adjusted, to be able to focus. More people end up in the emergency room, in hospitals. More people end up with illnesses related to bad diet. And there's a huge cost to all of that. It amazes me that talking about ending hunger is like controversial. You're labeled a liberal do-gooder because you want to end hunger. I mean, if you're the most conservative person in the world, you should want to end hunger because it is costly and we're all paying for it. And so this study kind of highlighted the fact that things are bad and things continue to get worse. And we need to do something about it. And on the federal level, we're going in the wrong direction. They're cutting SNAP. They already proposed cutting it by $200 billion. We're told there may be even more cuts in the president's upcoming budget. We've eliminated programs that promote better nutrition, the Farm to School program, for example. We need to stop and change course here.
I guess maybe some of the good news is that SNAP is reaching 67% of those 40% of households, but even that seems like it could be better because of how important we've talked about many times SNAP is in response to hunger compared to, say, food banks or food pantries.
Well, 2 things about SNAP. SNAP on average is about $2 per person per meal, so that's the benefit. And the other thing is that, this study is going to be fast outdated because, right now there are people who are being cut from the program, and the state has a challenge too. DTA, the Department of Transitional Assistance, is having a problem where people are trying to renew their benefits and they are trying to get new benefits, and quite frankly, there's not enough staff there to deal with the incoming calls. So, I think it's estimated like something like 90% of those who are calling in to get their benefits extended or to get new benefits are not getting their phone calls returned. So they're going to be falling off the radar screen here.
And that's going to get worse too because the big, beautiful budget then transfers a lot of this responsibility and cost that the federal government was picking up for DTA to the state. So this is just another place where the state's going to have to try to step in and fill that void, which there's only so many times you can do that without the benefit of federal money.
The government is supposed to be about helping people. I think that's a pretty universal view. It used to be anyway. And now we have a government that is doing the opposite. I mean, we are actually making people's lives more miserable. And quite frankly, I'm ashamed of that.
Well, speaking of federal dollars doing good, we did start out by mentioning that you brought your congressional podium to the lobby of the Shea Theater. And I feel like I should just say out there, because there's still some, misgivings about my relationship. I do not own the Shea Theater. The town of Montague owns the Shea Theater. I volunteer my time. I take $0. I make no money. But for years, we have been petitioning for a federal earmark just for the physical plant of the theater and sound and lights and better signage. It's been 10 years since I was involved with the theater, and you did have this press conference there earlier this week, $165,000 federal earmark. If only the congressional oversight of the Defense Department was as stringent as I know it will be when we go to try to access this money. We have to spend it, send a receipt in, get reimbursed, despite the fact that there was a giant check as part of the press conference. Can't cash those, it turns out. We tried. But it is all part of an overall federal earmark to improve Turners Falls, which is one of the poorest communities with the highest rates of food insecurity in the entire Commonwealth, but close to $1 million in federal funds to improve Avenue A. So as a resident of Montague and a volunteer at the theater, I thank you.
So between the Shea Theater and Avenue A improvements, it's, over $1 million, which quite frankly is a wise investment. I mean, the cultural economy helps, stimulate economic activity, makes communities a more desirable place for people to live. And look, I've represented that area now for a few years, and I've seen the improvements. I've seen, how Montague is coming alive. But I mean, we got to connect all the dots, and I mean that's the way it's supposed to work. Local, state, and federal governments with private sector are supposed to work together, and start to flesh out ideas and plans to how to see communities flourish. And so I'm hopeful and confident about what's going on, and it can be a model for other parts of the state as well. Let's be perfectly honest. Too often, all the state and federal money tends to be focused mostly on the Boston area. Mm-hmm. And yet, some of the more vibrant parts of the state are to the west. And so we're fighting hard to get more and more resources out to the west because we want these communities to reach their potential.
Besides bringing hope in federal dollars to Montague, what else is giving you hope this week, Congressman?
What's giving me hope when I went to Burlington yesterday to do an unannounced visit at that ICE facility. There were hundreds and hundreds of people out protesting, and they're out there regularly. People of all ages, and they show up in nice weather and in cold weather, when it's sunny and when it's raining, and they're making the difference. They're forcing discussions on the cruelty of our immigration policies, but also they're putting pressure on people like me and others that we got to do more. I really do admire people who, have the choice of sitting home and doing nothing, or going out and standing with a sign, and joining this demonstration. I told them all, thank you for doing this, because, you're forcing us to focus in on this issue. And you're reminding us that, our government is doing something that, quite frankly, is unacceptable by any standard of human rights.
U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, Congressman Jim McGovern, joins us every Thursday. If you've got a question for the Congressman, send it to us, thefab413@nepm.org. Thanks so much, Congressman.
All the best. Thanks.
We'll talk jazz coming to Tanglewood as the hard bop and beyond saxophonist Nick Hempton chats with us about his organ trio and latest album, Horns Locked.
After we speak with guest conductor Kedrick Armstrong and President Heather Casey Roberts about this weekend's program for the Springfield Symphony Orchestra titled Gloria, from Vivaldi to Gershwin, next.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass Amherst School of Public Policy, offering in-person and online graduate programs in public policy and data analytics. Admissions now open at umass.edu/SPP. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, helping Western Mass families achieve greater energy independence through solar power, battery systems, and air source heat pumps. northeast-solar.com.
This Saturday, April 11th at 3 p.m. at Symphony Hall in Springfield, the Springfield Symphony Orchestra presents Gloria, from Vivaldi to Gershwin. The program includes pieces by Vivaldi, Poulenc, Ravel, and Gershwin, and incorporates not just the Springfield Symphony Orchestra's chorus, but the UMass chorale as well.
Conducting this concert is Kedrick Armstrong, who was named in 2024 as the 9th music director in the Oakland Orchestra's almost 100-year history, one of the Washington Post's 22 for 22 That's the year 2022. Composers and performers to watch. Kedrick uses his voice and platform as a black conductor to advocate for classical music performances, publication, and preservation of minority voices.
Maestro Kedrick Armstrong and Springfield Symphony Orchestra President Heather Casey Roberts join us now. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here.
Poulenc. I'm so excited. Well, I feel like Poulenc has a really interesting catalog, and he's one of those composers who, if you know, you know. If you don't, you never heard of him. He just sounds like some random noises coming out of French noises that are coming out of. Talk about putting Poulenc next to Ravel. That's fun to have together.
It is, this sort of fringe connection between these two composers who I think, for myself and for many people, we forget just how close they are to us. Poulenc wrote this Gloria in 1959, and Ravel writes in 1928, but much later after that. So they're, in the last century, they are, a generation ahead of us, two sort of leading French composers, but writing in very different styles. Ravel always sort of searching for colors, for inspiration from other cultures. Bolero, which you will hear, is inspired by the Spanish Bolero, right? So he's so inspired by other cultures' dance. He's very inspired by jazz. He meets the American composer Gershwin, and they have this connection. Poulenc, on the other hand, is so devoutly himself. He's one of these composers that he writes one piece and then he writes the next piece, and you're like, yeah, that's Poulenc. There is no denying his music from the beginning of his output to the end of his output, and that's something that is so unique and so special because you get to sort of monitor his maturity and his growth as a composer through this very singular, idea of composition.
And it's really interesting that Ravel meets Gershwin because people know Ravel's symphonic pieces, but his piano pieces are where he really shines. And you can tell a difference between his early stuff where he's just kind of playing around a little bit, and then after he meets Gershwin, it hits this certain trajectory. And it's distinctly Ravel, but you can tell where that influence really came in.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And to really start the program with Vivaldi.
The only one not in the 20th century out of all of these composers, right?
To start with Vivaldi and end with Gershwin. But, I think it's this beautiful trajectory through the idea of divine influence. Poulenc was divinely inspired by Vivaldi's Gloria and writing his own Gloria. And you can see in Poulenc's writing that he's wrestling with this Baroque style of writing for choir and orchestra, but with the massive sound that he's dealing with 20th century forces. And rehearsing with the choir last night, I was telling them, you've got to sing this like you're singing in the 1720s, but like a Frenchman is trying to work with a choir in the 1720s, right? He's just trying to
put your
push
phones
it
away.
Travel with me, please.
Yes. Imagine I've got a cane and I'm stomping on the floor and I'm really mad
I'm really
at you.
angry. I'm really angry.
And we're speaking with the maestro Kedrick Armstrong, who will conduct Gloria from Vivaldi to Gershwin this Saturday, April 11th at the Springfield Symphony Orchestra.
Sorry to just jump in like that.
The excitement was palpable. It honestly was really wonderful to watch.
You don't
Yes.
see Poulenc on a whole lot of modern programs. It's hard to fit him in because he is so distinctly him.
And even when we were programming this concert, we ran into that issue as we were looking for a conductor that was going to work with us on this program.
So you came up with the program,
We
Heather?
were- yeah.
Or you? I thought Kedrick must be I've got this all laid out exactly how I want to
This
do it.
program was
We-
handed to me.
Oh,
Yeah,
hey.
we literally, so this program's really interesting because we struggled finding a conductor who was willing to do the Gloria. When Kedrick was recommended to us, we Zoomed him with our chorus director, Nikki, and the second she said the piece and you saw Kedrick's face and he was like, oh, you can't see me. I'm on the radio. Wow. My mouth was wide open. It was beautiful, but it was at that moment we were like, this is it. This is somebody who can come in and can take this kind of wild program that we have here and work with it, not just because they think they can, but because they wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't usually get to see choruses or symphonic choruses this huge.
Yeah, it's huge. We have what, 109?
I believe
109.
109
Yeah,
singers.
that's
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 amazing.
Mormon tabernacle size.
Yes, that they'll be on stage with also a 65 Right,
piece orchestra,
65
like
piece
Poulenc's
orchestra.
rights, like
Yeah.
I said,
Truly.
for the
Like,
orchestra
this is-
of the 1900s.
Yeah,
You're
this
thinking
is
Stravinsky.
dynamic.
Yep.
This is
Yeah.
this will be mind-blowing when you are in Symphony Hall and you get that first breath, that first moment. It's really going to be special.
And it's happening this Saturday afternoon at Springfield Symphony Hall. Kedrick Armstrong, you have recently been named the conductor of the Oakland Symphony Orchestra, and you've got some exciting things that you have been doing and incorporating there, including elevating the voices of 7 remarkable Black American composers, Blacknificent 7. I want to hear more about Blacknificent 7.
This is incredible.
First of all, the name is awesome.
I'm so good. So good.
This is a group of composers that sort of honestly formed through a group chat during the pandemic. 7 composers and performers. Many of them I knew. I have to shout out one of them, Sean O'Pebolo, was actually my oral skills and theory teacher when I was an undergrad student. So there was a deep connection already to this group of composers. There were, a group of 7 fantastic composers who were doing amazing work in some of the leading orchestras around the world. And I had this idea sort of based on my master's research project studying Black female composers, Black composers, and recognizing that one of the main things missing from this sort of genre of minority voices was that their music wasn't being preserved, right? So things would be commissioned, they would be premiered, but there were no recordings left behind. There were no great records left behind. And as orchestras programming music, we need to hear the music first in order to know that this is something that we're going to invest our time and money in. And so one of the first things that I pitched to the Oakland Symphony when I got there was not only commissioning all 7 of these composers, but commissioning and recording works from all of them, creating an anthology of their work so that there is this legacy of this Blacknificent 7 that's left behind that is undeniable. Poulenc also being a member of LaCisse, being a part of a collective of composers.
Yeah.
We have these composers who've traditionally been a part of these collectives that we recognize, and we have all of these great recordings of these composers. And I looked at Blacknificent 7 and said, you all deserve this. And by golly, I've got a music directorship. I can make this happen. Let's try to make it happen.
I think the important thing to really highlight about this is that we're talking about Black living composers.
Yeah.
It's important that people are reminded that this music is being currently made. It's not all made by people who are no longer with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that sort of fueled this for me was this idea and really highlighting that Black composers aren't and have never been a monolith. My study of Black female composers in my grad degree was really studying Black female composers who were working in a modernist landscape, composers like Julia Perry, Undine Smith Moore, Irene Britton Smith, composers who weren't, directly influenced by spirituals or by jazz in a sort of overt way, but composers who were writing in the style of the Second Viennese School and really exploring what modernist classical techniques meant for Black people studying classical music. And so often this music wasn't being performed or wasn't being recorded or even programmed because, it didn't sound like Black music. And so this whole conversation of what does Black music sound like within Blacknificent 7, there is such a variety of styles and influences. And that's what I love about them, right? They themselves show this breadth and diversity that lives in Black composers now, but that has always been there. And I think that is important to highlight in every culture. Every culture is not a direct monolith of their culture, even as they engage with classical music.
And that is Kedrick Lamar, who will take the baton in front of the... did I say Lamar? I knew I was going to do this.
At first I was like, oh, thank you. That's a compliment.
Kedrick Armstrong. It's not even Kendrick. It's Kedrick. Kedrick Armstrong will take the baton for the Springfield Symphony Orchestra this Saturday. Gloria.
Just got a big spike in ticket sales.
I know, right? Kendrick Lamar's coming.
So that said, looking at this program, we've also got Gershwin as the only American representation in this program, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because clearly his music is connected to some of those older traditions. It is an interesting choice to keep him as the only one who is from here. And I know that the program was handed to you, but for either of you, how you're feeling about Gershwin's presence in this program, just talk about that a little bit.
Heather Casey Roberts, president of Springfield Symphony Orchestra.
I sit in these programming committee meetings and I get to hear the perspectives from different musicians that play different instruments, our chorus director, our marketing team, and we're all coming up with what do we think the audience will hear and attach to and maybe associate with or recognize, but still fits into the flow of what we're trying to do here. And so this one for me, I will be honest, was done even a little before my time with Nikki and Paul. So I wish I could give a bigger backstory on how these programs all got together, but Kedrick can.
You know, I can give a very practical answer, and I think this is really important for people to know because it's something that, you know, of course, I got the program and I was given the option to change things around, except for the Poulenc.
Except for the Poulenc. That was a non-negotiable.
And the Vivaldi, because the two soloists were already sort of contracted for that. But on the second half, they were like, you know, the Ravel Bolero, Gershwin, American in Paris, would you like to change anything? Is there anything you want to do? And as a responsible music director, one of the things you have to consider is who's being hired on stage. Who is this orchestra already spending money on, right? The Ravel's Bolero calls for 2 saxophone players. You've got 2 saxophone players that are being hired into the orchestra that are being paid to be there for the full service. So you can make a choice as the guest conductor. You can change the Gershwin and get rid of the other piece that also has those 2 saxophone players, which would give those saxophone players a nice substantial amount of things to do on the program. Mm-hmm. Or you could reprogram that Gershwin and make the orchestra pay for 2 saxophone players to come play one piece.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the kind of responsibility as a conductor when you're building programs. You have to think financially, okay, well, these are the instruments we have on stage, and this is sort of the responsibility we have to these musicians, and we want to make sure that they also leave the concert experience feeling fulfilled, that they weren't just called in to play 10 minutes of music and then they sat around. And so it just so happens that Ravel's Bolero and Gershwin's American in Paris call for the same amount of saxophone players, and so it makes sense to have those 2 pieces sitting side by side, and they were written in the same year. You know, and so it's such a great programmatic tie where even me as someone who looks at every program and is thinking to myself, how do I put a woman voice on this program? How do I put a person of color in this program? There's sometimes when you look at it and you have to be fiduciary responsible, right? And you've got to think about how can I make these connections in a way that keeps this art form alive, right? And what hills do I die on today and what hills do I die on tomorrow?
That's such a fascinating take on having to lead an orchestra and an organization like this.
And even just listening to it, like, I appreciate you saying that out loud so much.
Because you're in charge of the purse strings who would have had to pay for the saxophones.
Well, 1,000%. But people don't honestly, I think, realize what a big part of programming the financial aspect of this is. We are a nonprofit organization. We do not survive on ticket sales. I wish we did. We survive on everything else. So when we're putting programs together to put back into the community, we have to make really hard decisions to produce the highest quality product that we can, but in a way that's going to still allow us to pay our musicians and our light bill at the same time. And what Kedrick said is so valid. There have been conductors that have come to us, and the programs that they've put together will need one person for one piece for 7 minutes that will cost us way more than we can afford right now. So we're trying to be creative but also sustainable. I mean, that's a part of this business right now. We have to sustain the tradition. We have to sustain our budgets. And we have to sustain our connection into the community and how we're putting ourselves back out there. And it's really a lot harder and more invested and challenging than I would have ever imagined. And I love hearing the perspective from Kedrick of seeing that too, because it's the direction we all have to move in to stay alive with live orchestral music anywhere, not just here.
With live music, with
all
the
of
arts
it.
in general.
Everything.
Yes, the world's on fire.
It is.
In sort of similar vein, Kedrick, talk about guest conducting spots and how that works into like your year and your planning and your programs that you make for your home orchestra too, because like if you're not there and they have something going on, like you've got to program like things into their concert season with guests for them as well. So like talk about guest conducting spots and like your perspective on them in your career.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, especially now being a music director, because, before that, it was just being the guest conductor and not really having to think about guest conductors coming in, to your home, to your baby, to your orchestra. And I will say, the great thing about Oakland so far is that I really haven't had to deal with that. I've done the majority of the concerts, all of the concerts in Oakland since I've been there. But in other scenarios where I've had to think about it or even plan for it for the future of like when the day comes when I do have to hire a music director, part of my job is to set up a sort of structure, a foundation of musical thought, right? These are the priorities of this orchestra. These are the things that we will not bend on. Oakland knows sort of these things programmatically that I look for, and I will scour earth until I can sort of find it because I know it exists. I know that there are composers out here who have written the kinds of things that I'm looking for that will speak to very specific parts of my community. It just takes a little bit of research. And so I sort of demand that of the conductors that guest conduct, are the conductors that I, surround myself in or just want to engage with. They're conductors that are sort of on that same wavelength, that are doing that same kind of research, that are doing that same kind of work. Now, on the other end, when I'm going somewhere to guest conduct and, I'm being invited into a space, I have to shapeshift a little bit more. I have to sort of, be a little bit more cunning. Not every community is Oakland. Not every community is as advanced as I am along on this thought train. And so how do I bring people along, right? I don't just want to show up in communities and demand that they adapt to my way. I want to be an educator. I want to be an advocate. I want to be a facilitator, right? So if it's 15 minutes, if it's 5 minutes, if it's 30 seconds, whatever I can do in my time there to sort of be the representation of the breadth and beauty of this art form and the diversity of this art form, that's my responsibility in those guest conducting positions.
How's Springfield doing in adapting?
Fantastic. It's been so great. And part of that is really just the willingness to recognize that there has to be a change, right? I think there's so much in classical music, and relatively, I get it that we want to hold on to this past. Like, trust me, I understand. Mahler is phenomenal. Dvorak is great. Like, I fell in love with these composers as a high schooler, and it turned me into a lover of classical music when no one in my family, no one in my world knows anything about this art form. Like, it grabbed me by the collar, and I'm an orchestral conductor now, right? I understand what it can do and what it can be, but at the same time, there are so many people who need to be brought along in a way that doesn't alienate, that doesn't say, hey, we have this cool high art thing that you need to engage with. It's the person who's going to say, yeah, remember when you saw the Super Bowl show and Bad Bunny was up there? All of those violins and that conductor, yeah, we've got that down the street. Like, you can come see that, and then we have to create an experience that is almost equal to that, right? Not only with Pop's programming, but with our classical programming. Yeah. We have to make it as exciting, as engaging, without downplaying or without sugarcoating it.
That's why Kedrick Armstrong did the Super Bowl last year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have I made up for it now?
I'm still waiting for my check from them, so, maybe this will help speed it up.
Do you think maybe they could forward it to the Springfield Symphony Orchestra?
I got you.
Thank you.
Kedrick, before we let you go, you did a lot of work with youth in Chicago and teaming up with the Lyric Opera of Chicago, the Chicago Urban League. Can you talk about that experience? As somebody who you just said, you grew up in an environment that was not exposed to this type of music and then fell in love with it.
I love talking about this experience because it, for me as a classical musician, was sort of a full circle moment. I talk about not growing up in classical music, but part of studying classical music is, the practice of assimilation. I didn't grow up with classical music, but I went to colleges and studied with teachers and was sort of told this narrative that if I wanted to succeed in classical music, I had to sort of abandon all of that other stuff and dedicate myself to the masters in order to be a master, right? And that's what I did throughout my education. I only was listening to classical music. I could recite any Beethoven symphony and any Mahler symphony at the drop of a needle on a vinyl. Like, I was obsessed because I wanted to make it. And then I got offered this gig working with 30 young people on the south side of Chicago, creating this cross-genre opera in which Lyric Opera of Chicago was going to hire a composer and a librettist to come write a story and write an opera based on these students that they were going to perform in. And these students had no musical experience whatsoever, didn't sing in any choirs, weren't in any high school productions.
Oh, that sounds so cool.
And what lyrics saw was my background as a gospel musician, my ability to teach music by rote, to sit down at the piano and teach these kids, who didn't know how to read music, this score, but also how to be able to conduct the lyric orchestra that was going to be there.
Yeah.
And so when I interviewed for the job, they were asking me, like, what's your experience in hip hop and jazz and these other genres that, these kids listen to? And I was like, oh, yeah, I know Kendrick Lamar and Chance the Rapper. That's literally what I said. And, like, I maybe knew a song or two, but I, like, left the interview and got in my car and started listening to, like, every hip hop and every jazz and every R&B album and truly analyzing and studying it like a music historian. Like, I was like, I'm going to learn this craft so that I can go into that room and teach this art form, teach the art form of hip hop and rap and R&B like I would teach, classical music. Like, I want to become a master. And that experience, like, completely changed my life. Like, working with those kids, seeing their engagement, they performed on the Lyric Opera stage with an orchestra underneath them. These kids who had never sung, danced, done any of that stuff. And some of the kids who I came in day one and refused to sing were like full voiced, on the final night. And so that kind of involvement with kids, right? It's not just bringing them into the concert hall and saying, hey, look at this art form. Hey, look at an orchestra. It's getting them involved. It's getting them on stage, getting them real life experience. And they don't have to sound like the New York Phil, right? That's not the goal. The goal is for them to walk away with a lifelong appreciation of this art form that will last throughout generations.
Amazing.
It's interesting. You're like, I went home and I just obsessively listened to these things. And I'm like, that's an interesting way to look at it, because I'm going to bring this back to Bolero, which I think is kind of a poster child for obsession.
Yeah.
But also because I love that piece. Like, that's one of the pieces that's like one of my dad's favorites. So it was one of my first classical pieces in general. But I also think because of the way that it is written, it is one of the hardest pieces to conduct well. That repetition is difficult to put on stage and make sure that people really feel the build that is inherent in that. And some people find that piece really boring because it just repeats itself for 17 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to make a connection that some people might disagree with, but in being a classical musician, I think a lot of people's sort of accusation of popular genres is that there's not a lot going on, right? There's not a lot going on underneath it. I can't understand lyrics, and in my sort of deep dive into the art form, you start to realize that, of course, in all genres, even classical music, there is fluff and there is substance, right? And then there's this sort of stuff that's in between. And I think Bolero lives in that in between, right? People who don't get it will look at it and be like, oh, it's a fluff piece. There's nothing behind it. But to me, it's the art of a great build. It's the art of the great feel. It's the same thing as, I listen to some of my favorite hip hop artists and you listen to the production behind their songs and you're like, there's an art behind this, right? It's a loop and it's the same thing over and over again. But what an artist and what a producer does in that feel is what makes it phenomenal, is what makes a hit record from something that just disappears. What Bolero is able to do, what Ravel is able to do in the orchestration of Bolero, it takes a conductor who understands that little minute nuance between, this loop and that loop, right? And how to make that connection, how to draw that story. And so, yeah, it's a challenge, it's a score that I've avoided for a very, very long time.
Like I said, it's real. Like, yeah, you got to, like, out of the nest with you.
But I truly think our audiences will absolutely enjoy it. And especially in the context of these other programs, it tells such a dynamic picture. And to have the American in Paris afterward, it's, we're going to blow the roof off the place.
Yeah, you are.
It's this Saturday afternoon at Springfield Symphony Hall, Gloria from Vivaldi to Gershwin, and it will be conducted by Maestro Kedrick Armstrong, who's been joining us, as well as Springfield Symphony Orchestra President Heather Casey Roberts in studio with us. It sounds like a fascinating program. You are a fascinating figure, and you're always doing fascinating stuff over at Springfield Symphony Hall.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for
Our
having us.
pleasure.
And Monty, you don't have to feel bad. Even Starbucks put Kendrick on his cup.
Did you really?
They did.
Yeah, they did.
No, it's a part of my life.
I'm so sorry.
Did they put a little mustard on it?
I'll be sure to ask for that next time.
Don't.
You can find tickets and more information about the pieces and performers that are part of this Saturday's program from the Springfield Symphony Orchestra through their website. And thanks again to Heather Casey Roberts and Kedrick Armstrong for hanging out with us.
To make sure that it's right. Now we get into the ever-shifting but eminently catchy jazz of Nick Hempton, which he'll bring to Tanglewood's Learning Institute on Friday, April 10th.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. Nick Hempton is an alto and tenor saxophonist, although he may say saxophonist, given where he's from. We'll have to ask him about that. Playing swinging jazz music for the people, a veteran of the New York scene. He fills rooms big and small throughout that city, as well as concert halls and festivals around the world. Influenced by the greats of the instrument, Dexter Gordon, Sonny Stitt, Cannonball Adderley, and informed by a misspent youth playing rhythm and blues and ska in his native Australia.
He learned to play jazz the old-fashioned way through jam sessions at local clubs and late-night practice sessions on Sydney's famous Harbour Bridge. A year of sea working on cruise ships raised the funds for a flight to New York City, where he's been since 2004. Nick has built a strong reputation in that city and abroad as an entertaining and energetic frontman, whether in the organ band format or leading conventional hard bop quartets and quintets.
His itinerant lifestyle has taken him to stages throughout the U.S., Europe, and Australia, as well as regular visits to China and Southeast Asia. He's made numerous television and radio appearances and has also developed an excellent reputation as a music educator.
And this Friday, he'll perform at the Tanglewood Learning Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick Hempton.
What a wonderful introduction.
It's all
So familiar somehow.
You did all
Thank
those
you for having me.
Nick Hempton sounds so much like Northampton, which is one of the cities that we serve here. So it's fun to.
All right.
It'll be hard for me not to call you Northampton, but it's
That's all right. I'll take it.
it's Nick Hempton. And do you say saxophonist or saxophonist as somebody from Australia?
I think, these days, I'm so confused by where I come from and where I am that whatever comes out, comes out.
What originally came out when you first became one?
Saxophonist.
I love that. It sounds classier.
I guess so. If I'd played the flute, I would have been a flautist.
Or a flautist. That's another one that gets
Or a
debated.
fluter.
A fluter.
Or a fluter.
We have heard somebody from Tanglewood in the BSO refer to it as a fluter, which I think
I
is
love it.
I love it too.
Talk about that shift to the organ trio, because like your other band and some other quintets that you've been a part of have definitely been more traditional, but your last few albums and this very last one that you've put out, Horns Locked, is organ trio with two saxophones on top of it.
Yeah, so as you said, for years I played in the traditional acoustic quartet format, which is piano, bass, and drums. And I started hanging out at a club in Harlem called Showman's, which is one of the original and last standing organ rooms in New York. They used to be all over the place. These just kind of small bars, but with a Hammond organ in the center of stage. And this was a great room, and a lot of great players would play up there, and I used to go and hang out there as often as I could. And the sound of the organ just lit me on fire. I couldn't get enough of it. And I loved the way it really reaches audiences almost immediately. There's something about it, the rumble of that sound, it pricks people's ears up.
I think it might be the Leslie that makes people love the organ that way. Is that what it? I mean,
Well, that is a big part of it, and
a Leslie is a speaker that spins around and it creates this incredible, like almost like what makes a sitar or all these
The
other
resonance.
droning instruments of resonance. It really hits some part of the human soul in a way that it draws people in, I think.
it's so cool, isn't it? And I love watching it still. I mean, it is
Yeah.
a huge speaker cabinet with this rotating kind of bell inside it,
Yeah.
and it's operated by the organist with his left hand, and he just flicks it on and off depending what speed they want it to be turning. And you hear the sound change immediately, and it's really cool.
We're speaking with Nick Hempton, who'll be at Tanglewood at the Lindy Center this Friday. Tanglewood doing stuff in April, which is super exciting. And the new album is called Horns Locked, and it's an incredible album. Also, one of the coolest saxophone-named albums you could.
I mean, it's perfect because there's two of them.
Yes. Talk about your partner in crime in Horns Locked.
I go out to play in Vancouver fairly often, probably twice a year. There's a great organ player and a great drummer out there I like to play with every time I go. And the club and a lot of, in fact, Vancouver jazz is run by a saxophone player called Corey Weeds. Now, I've been friends with Corey for many years, and he and I are into the same kind of music. I was going out there just to make a trio record, and then I thought, why not do something different? Because he and I are both really crazy about the two tenor records from the 60s. It would be like Sonny Stitt and Gene Ammons, or Lockjaw Davis and Johnny Griffin. There were a lot of like tenor battles that they used to call it, often with the organ band rhythm section. So I said, let's try that. And I convinced him to come and be a part of it, and it worked out great.
Yeah, there's some really beautiful harmonic moments that happen throughout this album. It's not as easy to say sexarmony as it is to say guitarmony, but that is what happens, and it's beautiful.
I mean, the only downside to playing with a Canadian band is that it's supposed to be a tenor battle. You're supposed to really go after each other. But an Australian and a Canadian, we're just so polite all the time. No, please, after you. No, after you. The aggression is not there like it could be.
We mentioned in the intro that you had a misspent youth playing R&B and ska in Australia. Who were you listening to in the world of ska?
So we're talking about mid-90s. And there was a real ska revival around the world, I think, and particularly in Australia. So that we were sort of going by second wave English ska, like the Specials and Madness and bands like that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I was into third wave ska at that moment, the Mighty Mighty Bosstones growing up in the Boston area. So.
Right, that's what I was going to say. So that was happening. I mean, we had a bunch of ska bands in Sydney doing pretty much Boston stuff.
Yeah.
So it was big at the time, and I loved it. I still love those, especially those English bands from the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get from listening to ska and playing ska into jazz?
I had no jazz in my upbringing, really. My whole family is classical musicians. And so I didn't really listen to ska until I started playing it. But it was rhythm and blues music that got me first. Like when I started finding my own tastes in music in my early teens, it was Aretha Franklin and James Brown and Sam and Dave and Sam Cooke and musicians like that really got me started. So I listened to all that and a lot of Ray Charles, and it was always the saxophone solos that got me that I really dug. And then that took me into jazz. I mean, I then found Charlie Parker and Dexter Gordon, and it was all over.
Yeah. Was there a particular R&B saxophone solo that you remember distinctly as being like, what is this and how can I be a part of it?
Yeah, I think a couple of the hits from Ray Charles.
Yeah.
I Got a Woman. Tenor player was Don Wilkerson. I didn't find that out until many years later. But it was his playing that really excited me at that time. And I found him on wherever I could. I kind of recognized that sound after that. And once you start recognizing somebody's tone, that makes you curious about other saxophone players and other styles of music. So once I started getting into that, then I found jazz saxophone players that I loved.
We're speaking with Nick Hempton, who is playing at Tanglewood, believe it or not, in April this Friday, which is so exciting. This is really the first season that Tanglewood has done things outside of their summer series. It's a night of soul jazz from NYC at the Lindy Center. Have you performed at Tanglewood before, Nick?
I played this exact room early last year. I was in a band by a great trumpet player called Jumani Smith. It's such a beautiful room. The funny thing about what we're trying to do is recreate the feel of a dingy, dark New York City basement.
I love it.
In the well-lit and sublime acoustics of Studio E. So it's going to be weird. It's very polite up there, and we're going to attempt to make it a little bit dirty.
Oh,
I love that.
Love it.
You're bringing your Australian bona fides, I think will go a long way there. Bring some more folks out from Boston, and we'll be peas in a pod.
Yeah, man.
When I listen to your music, it sounds like I want you to score a film noir soundtrack, especially some of your earlier stuff. You even have an album called Odd Man Out that feels very Third Man-esque.
That's what I was getting into at that time.
Yeah.
I was watching a lot of noir movies, and I still love that. Like the soundtrack to those movies, even if the movies, like a lot of the noir movies are a bit schlocky, but the soundtracks are often fantastic.
Yeah.
And it'll get you through the movie.
Can you talk about being a part of the Migrant Workers Project? Because
Oh, wow,
that
that was
album
a
is
long
really
time ago.
fantastic. That project is really interesting. And your tone on it, I think, is something, like you were saying, it's a thread that you can start hearing in your albums from there on. But that assembly of musicians is particularly interesting. And I know it was a while ago, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I'm still friends with all the guys in that band, and we do laugh about the name of that group and how it might get us into trouble these days.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was the simpler times. So most of that band are Israeli musicians whom I've known for years in New York, because there are so many great Israeli jazz musicians. Yeah, I got together with these guys, and we're all composers, and we all lead our own bands, and just decided, let's see what happens if we all throw it together. That's a really interesting album, actually. I do like to go back and listen to that, because we all, I think, contributed 2 compositions each to it, and they're very different.
Yes.
And you see where everybody comes from. Yeah, and it's a really interesting album, and like nothing else I've ever recorded, I don't think.
I would have to agree with you there. But like you said, you can really hear like some of your ideas and some of your tonality that really carries into your own work later. Did you always want to move to New York to do jazz?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was no question. As soon as I started playing, I mean, jazz in Australia is a funny thing. There are a lot of good musicians, but not really the support or the understanding from the audience. You know, it's hard to have an educated crowd in Australia because there's just not a lot of jazz in the history, in the background of that country. There were a couple of people who were crazy about American jazz, some older musicians that I would hang out with, and they just said, first of all, you've got to go to New York and just, even if you don't stay, just go and check out what's happening, find out how they're playing over there. So I did it when I was 20. I saved up some money and I went over and ran through my money in a month and had to come back home again. But it was amazing. And as soon as I was here, I was hooked. I said, I've got to come back as soon as I can. That was my goal for the next couple of years, just go back and save money and get back to New York.
We mentioned, Nick Hempton, that your most recent album is called Horns Locked, and you were saying how it's supposed to be a saxophone battle, and you play the alto and tenor sax. Have you ever thought about picking a fight with soprano saxophonist Kenny G?
Oh, no. You pick on someone your own size, don't you?
Well, like, in similar fashion, like, what appealed about the middle? Because, I mean, there's various tonalities to saxophones, but I'm especially partial to anyone who plays baritone. No shade to
I do love Barry sax.
It's just
Sure.
the deep hunkiness of it. But, like, what appealed about the tonality of the two saxophones that you do play?
Alto was the instrument that I had. I mean, there's no other way of looking at that. That's somebody lent me an alto when I was 15.
They didn't lend you a tenor?
Stop
No,
it.
exactly right. I mean,
You queued that one right up
thanks for
me.
nothing.
They're like, get your own tenor, and you're like, bet.
Yeah, and that's what ended up happening because, you know, you play alto, but you want to get work. And a lot of the rock and roll gigs that I was doing in my late teens, you had to play tenor for it. So I bought a cheap tenor, but I didn't really play it very much. And it was only 10 or 12 years ago that I bought a proper great old tenor saxophone from 80 years ago that I really got serious about it and found my own voice on tenor, because you have to play them like they're two different instruments.
Right.
You know, you can't play your alto sound and your alto lines on tenor. It just doesn't sound right. So you have to put the time into finding your voice on both instruments separately.
It took everything in my power not to interrupt you to say that you got this tenor 10 or 12 years ago.
Oh, that's very good, yeah.
Don't encourage him.
Thank you.
Well, people would often ask me to play tenor, and it would be 10 or 12 miles away. But, you know,
Oh, no, there's two of you
We're going to get along swimmingly, Nick Hempton. Nick is playing at Tanglewood this Friday in the Lindy Center.
I should point out also that they're bringing in a Hammond organ and a Leslie speaker for us on Friday.
Oh, beautiful. So,
Has never happened in that room before, so I'm very excited to hear that.
and that'll add to the dark mystery that we were talking about the wonders of the organ and creating that New York City club vibe in the middle of the woods in the Berkshires.
I mean, if people have not seen a great Hammond organ player, Kyle Kohler, who I have with me on organ, is just dynamic. He's so much fun to watch when he plays. It's like he's driving a bus or something. He's really in control of all pedals and switches and dials and everything. It's mad scientist gear.
Playing organ always looks like it takes your entire body.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Is there anything about your rock playing years that still influences the way that you are on stage while playing jazz?
That's a good question. I think probably, yeah. I mean, I think playing rock and roll and ska and rhythm and blues, it's a very direct impact on the audience. You're getting a response immediately. And I think in jazz, I don't want to say that people don't take the audience into consideration enough, but often you'll go to a jazz concert and the audience is just sitting there observing from the outside. And I think what I learned playing rhythm and blues especially was immediately hooking the audience and getting the energy coming back. Because so much for me when I'm performing is I put out a lot of energy. If there's nothing coming back, it's just draining. But if I'm getting energy coming back from the audience, then it's invigorating. So I think that idea of making it a two-way conversation is something that I take from the rhythm and blues days. And also just rhythm. I mean, I'm really into getting grooves happening. And if I can get people's feet tapping and heads bobbing and smiling, then I've done my job.
Nick Hempton this Friday for the first known time at the Lindy Center. Hammond organ with a Leslie cabinet, bringing the vibes of a New York City jazz club scene through the saxophone of an Australian to the Berkshires. The Tanglewood Learning Institute Jazz Series bringing Nick Hempton, a night of soul jazz from New York City this Friday, April 10th, 7 p.m. Nick, it's been a delight talking to you. It's been amazing just spending the day listening to your music in preparation for this conversation.
Oh,
and
that
it'd be
part.
even better to see it live on Friday night.
I can't wait. It's going to be super fun.
And Peter Sokolowski will be playing some Nick Hampton on Jazz a la Mode right here on NEPM tonight.
Jazz at 8. On the next Fabulous 413, it's double live Music Friday with 2 returning guests as we welcome Sean Lewis Trishka, the son of Tony Trishka, back to our studio ahead of his show at the Parlor Room on Sunday.
And with Suitcase Junket joining us to talk about the concert Sparkletown happening at the Shea Theater, which honors the music and legacy of his sister Kate Lorenz.
Plus a preview of Provision's upcoming Italian Wine Festival with a Wine Thunderdome from their location in Thorns Marketplace.
That festival is so fun!
I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith. We'll talk to you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.